What would you do if a promise cost you your entire life? I still don't know the answer, but I'm living with that question every day. I'm telling my story here, in this space, because I have no one else. They took my name, my freedom, and my voice. This platform is the only window I have left, the only chance for my truth to escape these walls. I need someone, somewhere, to hear what really happened. I'm not telling this to be judged. I'm telling it to be understood. If you believe deep down that there's more to my story than a jury's verdict, if you feel the weight of the injustice, I ask that you subscribe on this channel. By doing so, you are not just following a story, you are becoming my witness. You are giving me the strength to continue reliving this pain, in the hope that the truth will finally find the light. If what I've said so far, if my fear and my loss have touched your heart, please leave a like in this video. I know I'm not shouting into the void. It shows me that someone out there cares, and it helps this story reach other people who, like me, may be trapped in their own silent battles. I feel so alone within these four walls. The idea that this confession is crossing borders, that it's being heard in places I may never see again, is what keeps me sane. It's my only reminder that there's still a world out there. Please tell me you're there. Comment below. Tell me, from which city and country are you listening to me? Reading those names, imagining those places, is like breathing fresh air. It's the only proof I have that my voice is, in some way, free. Thank you for listening. Now, take a deep breath. My real journey has barely begun. The first night in prison isn't about fear, it's about sound. The sound of metal hitting metal, the sound of muffled cries, and the sound of your own name fading away. The first night in prison isn't about fear, it's about sound. The sound of metal hitting metal, an echo that seems to chew on the silence and spit out panic. The sound of keys, not like the keys to my house in Silver Lake, which jingled with promises of chamomile tea and mystery novels. These were heavy, definitive keys, turning in the lock like the last nail in a coffin. I was stripped, searched with cold, impersonal brutality, and given a rough blue uniform that smelled of industrial bleach and a million anonymous despairs. They gave me a number. My name is Alara Hayes. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The air was heavy with the smell of disinfectant, mold, and something older, something like dust and old sweat. The hallway light was a sickly bluish-white, a light that didn't illuminate, only exposed. Each step down the concrete corridor was a deeper dive into the unthinkable. I was no longer a librarian. I was no longer a neighbor. I was prisoner 774B, a terrorist, a murderer, the woman who stole a Bible. The door to cell 3B creaked and slammed shut behind me with a dull, final thud. The sound was so loud my heart stopped for a second, and then raced, pounding against my ribs like a caged bird. The cell was tiny, a concrete tomb, a metal bunk bed, a stainless steel toilet, and a minuscule sink. A woman sat on the bottom bunk, her back straight, braiding her dark hair with almost violent precision. She didn't look up when I entered, but I felt her gaze on me, cold and heavy. The silence in the cell was louder than the muffled screams in the hallway. I stood there, clutching my thin sheet and a bar of soap that smelled of caustic soda. "Top bunk," she said, her voice hoarse, emotionless, still focused on her braids. "Don't touch my things, don't talk to me after the lights go out, and don't cry. I hate people who cry." She finally looked up. Their eyes were empty, having seen everything and cared for nothing. I climbed onto the top bunk, my hands trembling so much I could barely straighten the sheet. The mattress was as thin as cardboard and cold. The metal of the guardrail was icy against my skin. The lights went out precisely at 10 o'clock at night, plunging the cell into a thick darkness, broken only by the security light in the hallway, which painted a sinister bar on the opposite wall. The night came alive. Murmurs, dry coughs, a muffled sob coming from somewhere distant. My cellie, as they called her, breathed rhythmically beneath me, already lost in a sleep that seemed impossible. I huddled under the thin blanket, which couldn't block the cold emanating from the concrete. I closed my eyes and saw Evelyn's face, smiling at me over her rose hedge. I saw the prosecutor pointing at me, the word terrorist exploding in the courtroom. I only hid a Bible. The irony was bitter. I was in a maximum security prison, surrounded by women who had taken lives, and my only crime had been protecting a woman's holy book. I stared into the darkness, and the darkness stared back. I realized, with terrifying clarity, that my sentence wasn't just about Evelyn's murder. It was about the book, and whoever betrayed me, whoever told the police where to find that Bible, didn't just want to imprison me. They wanted to silence me. They wanted to erase me. The awakening was violent. There was no gentle sunrise or familiar smell of coffee. At 4:30 a.m., a sharp electric hum cut through the darkness, followed by clang. The deafening sound of cell doors being electronically unlocked filled the block. White fluorescent lights flooded the block, flashing and buzzing, instantly bringing tears to my eyes. They weren't wake-up lights, they were exposure lights, to ensure no one could hide, not even in their sleep. "Feet on the floor!" a female voice yelled down the hallway, a voice that sounded like crushed gravel. "Count! Feet on the floor now!" My cellmate, whose name I didn't yet know, swung her legs out of the bunk with practiced efficiency, standing beside the bed, hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the door. I stumbled, nearly falling off the top bunk. The concrete floor was icy, a shock that ran down my spine. I stood beside her, mirroring her posture, feeling the cool morning air against the thin skin of my uniform. The smell of the night, sweat, fear, and the metallic odor of the toilet was suddenly replaced by a pungent smell of burnt coffee and something resembling overcooked oatmeal wafting from the cafeteria. A guard stopped at our open door. He didn't look at us as people. He scanned us. His eyes passed over me, then over my cellie, and he barked, "Two!" before moving on, his heavy boots marking the rhythm of this new reality. The count, the first ritual of the day. We were cattle being counted before slaughter. For 15 minutes, we stood there, motionless in the cold, waiting for the released that echoed down the corridor. My cellmate went to the sink and splashed cold water on her face. "Showers are on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays," she murmured, still not looking at me. "Breakfast in 5, stay in line. Don't look anyone in the eye. Don't sit at an occupied table, and eat quickly." She spoke in short bursts, as if the words cost her energy. I just nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I felt small, dehumanized, a ghost dressed in blue. The reflection I saw in the polished steel toilet wasn't mine. It was the face of a terrified pale woman with tangled hair. It was the face of prisoner 774B. The cafeteria was a vast hall of concrete and steel, and the noise was a physical assault. Hundreds of women in blue and orange uniforms, the sound of metal trays clattering, chairs being dragged, and a constant hum of conversations that sounded more like growls than words. The hierarchy was visible and terrifying. The tables near the windows, if we can even call those barred slits windows, were occupied by women who moved with dangerous confidence. Newcomers, like me, hovered near the entrance, trying to be invisible. I picked up my tray. A gray porridge that was supposed to be oatmeal, a piece of dry bread, and a plastic mug with a dark, bitter liquid. I followed my advice. Cellie, and I found an empty spot in the corner, my back to the wall. I tried to swallow the oatmeal. It tasted like wet cardboard and salt. The bread scratched my throat, but I ate it. Each spoonful was an act of survival. I watched the women. Their gazes were hard, assessing. They didn't converse. They exchanged information, measured power. It was there, in that noisy, cold cafeteria, that I had my first mini turning point. I realized that surviving here wasn't about proving my innocence. Nobody cared about the truth. It was about navigating an ocean of predators, and I was just a piece of wood floating. The real cell wasn't the concrete, it was the gaze of the others. The first time I stepped into the courtyard, I nearly choked. Not from lack of air, but from too much of it. After 3 days confined to the cell and the claustrophobic corridors, the open sky felt like an assault. It was a small, square patch of pale blue sky, framed by concrete walls so high they seemed to touch the clouds, crowned by rolls and rolls of barbed wire that gleamed cruelly under the morning sun. The sun was there, but it didn't warm. It was a cold, interrogative light. The courtyard wasn't a garden. It was a dusty concrete bowl with a few rusty basketball hoops and metal benches bolted to the ground. The sound was different from the cafeteria. It was higher pitched. The thud of the basketballs, the thwack playing cards clinked on a stone table. High-pitched cries of laughter sounded more like threats, and the steady rhythm of worn sneakers thumping against the concrete while dozens of women walked in endless circles like sharks patrolling a tank. The smell was of dust, sweat, and the sweet chemical odor of cheap cigarettes manufactured in the prison. I felt naked, exposed under that open sky. In the cell, there were walls. Here, there were only eyes. I went with the flow, keeping my head down, as Rook, my cellmate, whose name I finally heard a guard shout, had instructed me. "In the yard, find a wall and become part of it," she said before we left. "Don't walk in the middle. The middle is where things happen." I saw what she meant. The yard was a living map of prison politics. There were the families, rigidly defined groups. The older women, the mentors, walked in pairs or trios on the inside lane of the track, speaking softly, their faces etched with acceptance. The athletes dominated the court, their strong bodies and aggressive movements. There was a group in a corner doing what looked like a Bible study, their heads together in prayer, an irony that hit me like a punch in the gut. Rook was in the weight room, a figure of concentrated fury, lifting makeshift weights with an intensity that frightened me. She was in control of her anger, channeling it into muscle. Me? I was just fear, trying to find a wall. I leaned against the gates, pretending to stare into nothingness, just trying to breathe and survive that hour. That's when it happened. I was so focused on being invisible that I didn't see the group of 3 women approaching until it was too late. They walked slowly, with an arrogance that proclaimed their ownership of the space. The leader, a tall woman with a thin scar running from her eyebrow to her chin, stopped right in front of me, blocking my view of the sky. "Look what we have here," she said, her voice low and sing-song, but full of venom. "Fresh meat." Her 2 companions laughed. I froze, my blood running cold, Rook's words echoing, "Don't look anyone in the eyes." I tried to look away, but she placed a finger under my chin, forcing my head up. The smell of industrial soap and cigarettes came from her. "What's your name, little rat?" I couldn't speak. One of her friends laughed. "Leave her alone, Red. I know who she is. I saw her on the news." Red's smile widened, but didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, really?" she asked, her dead eyes piercing mine. "Then tell me, who is she?" The other woman stepped forward, her face close to mine. "She's the Bible Girl," a mini turnaround. The name struck me. Bible Girl, it wasn't a nickname. It was a sentence. My story had come before me. I wasn't anonymous. I wasn't invisible. I was a target. The words Bible Girl hung in the dusty courtyard air, heavy and disgusting. The real poison wasn't in Red's scar, but in the way she pronounced my new name. There was amusement in her voice, the kind of amusement a cat has before deciding how to play with the mouse. The courtyard, which seconds before had been a cacophony of sounds, seemed to fall silent. The footsteps on the concrete track stopped. The basketball stopped bouncing. All the eyes I had tried so hard to avoid were now fixed on me, pinned like pins. I was leaning against the concrete block wall, which felt colder than ever. There was nowhere to run. Red took another step, her tall body completely blocking the sun. She smelled of industrial soap, but underneath it was a metallic smell, like old coins. She wasn't just intimidating me, she was assessing me, measuring me. "So," she hummed, tilting her head, "you're the crazy one with the faith, the one who killed the old lady for the holy book." I wanted to scream that it was a lie, that I would never hurt Evelyn, that I wasn't even religious. but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth, thick and useless. I didn't, I stammered. I didn't kill her. The two women beside Red laughed, a short, sharp sound. Oh, we're all innocent here, dear, Red said. I don't care about the old lady. What I want to know is, what kind of Bible is worth a death sentence, huh? It must be gold-plated. She moved so close I could see the broken capillaries in her eyes. Terror was a cold knot in my stomach. She didn't think I was a fanatic. She thought I was a thief who had found something of value. She thought I knew a secret. I don't know what you're talking about, I whispered, tears beginning to burn in the corners of my eyes. It was just her book. Red's smile vanished. Don't lie to me, Bible girl. Nobody goes to life for just one book. She raised her hand, and for a second, I thought she was going to hit me. I flinched. Red! The voice came from the weight room. It was low, powerful, and cut through the tense air like a knife. Rook. She didn't move, didn't drop the weight she was holding, but her voice was enough. Red froze, her hand still in the air. She turned slowly. I'm busy, Rook, Red said. I'm just welcoming our new celebrity. Rook put the weight down with a controlled thud. She's Block B trouble, and she's attracting the guards' attention. Leave her alone. She's not worth your time. There was a moment of thick silence. The two leaders stared at each other across the courtyard. A cold war fought in a single glance. I barely breathed. Red was calculating. The pleasure of breaking me versus the cost of challenging Rook. Finally, Red snorted, a sound of contempt. She turned to me, her eyes full of promises. You got lucky, little rat. She nudged my shoulder hard. Talk to you later. They stepped back, laughing, and the courtyard slowly came back to life. I slid down the wall until I was almost sitting on the floor, my legs trembling so violently they couldn't support me. Rook's intervention wasn't a rescue, it was a calculation of risk. And the mini-twist came with icy clarity. Rook was right. Red didn't just want to intimidate me, she wanted whatever she wanted. He thought what the Bible represented. The police, the prosecutor, and now the alpha predator of the prison. They were all obsessed with that book. Evelyn told me, keep it where not even a shadow can find it. I thought it was a poetic metaphor. But what if it wasn't? What if Evelyn was murdered, not by me, but by that book? The Bible wasn't just faith. It was a secret people were willing to kill for. And I was the only one who knew where it was. The walk back from the yard to Block B was a walk of shame. I could feel my back burning from the stairs. I was no longer invisible. I was the Bible girl, the newcomer who had been marked by Red and saved by Rook. I was contested property. When the steel door of our cell slammed shut, the sound seemed to seal my fate. Rook went in first and headed straight for her bed, sitting down and methodically sharpening the tip of a toothbrush on a strip of sandpaper she kept hidden under the thin mattress. The scraping sound was low, rhythmic, unnerving. The air in the cell was thick, hard to breathe. I stood near the door, unsure what to do or say. Gratitude battled terror. She had saved me. She had prevented me from being beaten, or worse. But the way she did it, with cold authority, without even looking at me, didn't feel like an act of compassion. It felt like a declaration of ownership. I needed to say something. Thank you, I whispered, the words sounding pathetically weak in the small concrete space. Rook didn't stop sanding. Skirch, skirch, skirch. The sandpaper on the plastic was the only answer. Thank you, I repeated, a little louder, my voice trembling. Out in the yard, with Red. She stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Slowly she raised her eyes. Her eyes weren't empty as I thought. They were old, full of a cold, pragmatic intelligence, like those of a wolf. You think I did that because you... she asked, her voice low, almost a growl. She put down her toothbrush. Let me explain how things work here, Bible girl, since you're clearly too stupid to survive a week. She stood up, not threateningly, but like a teacher addressing a slow student. Red wanted to put on a show with you. A show means blood. Blood means guards. Guards mean heat. Heat means they lock down the whole block. Lockdowns mean I lose my time in the yard, I lose my place in the phone line, and most importantly, she leaned forward slightly, they do cell searches, and I hate it when they mess with my things. I recoiled until my back hit the cold metal door. The relief I felt in the courtyard turned to ice. She hadn't saved me. She had protected her routine. I didn't save you from anything, she continued, reading the terror on my face with a slight trace of disdain. I only postponed the problem. And now you have a new one. That was the mini twist. Red can't touch you now because I said no. You are now my responsibility. You are now me. He must, the word debt hung between us, more dangerous than any punch. A debt in prison wasn't paid with money. It was paid with favors, with silence, with contraband, or with pain. I had traded a visible predator for a mistress of the shadows. Rook returned to her bed, picked up the sharpened toothbrush, and looked at her. And I always collect my debts. She paused, and then, with surgical precision, she asked the question I feared most. The prosecution said you were a terrorist. That's stupid. They don't use that word for nothing. That Bible? It wasn't just a book, was it? Nobody causes this much trouble for faith. She looked at me. Red thinks it's worth money. I think it's worth information. What was in that book, Elara Hayes, that caused Evelyn Reed's death? She knew my name. She had researched me. I was trapped. Trapped between Red, who saw me as a gold treasure chest, and Rook, who saw me as a key. The payment of my debt began 2 days later. Rook didn't talk to me about it in the cell. She was too smart for that, knowing the concrete walls could have electronic ears. Instead, she woke me with a dry nudge on the mattress at 4 a.m., half an hour before the count. You're in the kitchen today, she murmured in the darkness, her voice a low noise in the stillness. It's not a request. I was transferred from the laundry, a noisy but relatively safe job, to the steamy hell of the kitchen. The kitchen wasn't a place to cook. It was a human fuel factory, a cauldron of tensions. The heat was a solid wall as soon as you entered, heavy with the dampness of giant boiling pots. The air smelled of rancid grease, overcooked potatoes, and the omnipresent smell of bleach used to scrub the slippery floor. The noise was deafening. The clang of steel pots, the hum of exhaust fans, and the shouts of the chefs, long-term inmates who ruled the stoves with metal spoons that looked like weapons. My new home was the pit, the washing area, where they handed me a steel brush and pointed me toward a mountain of greasy pots and pans. The water was scalding, almost boiling, and within minutes, my hands, used to turning pages, were red and throbbing, the sensitive skin beginning to blister. I had been scrubbing the same pot of burnt soup for 20 minutes, sweat dripping down my face and mingling with the dirty water, when Rook appeared beside me. She was carrying a mop bucket, moving with a purpose that made her invisible to the guards. She belonged there. She didn't even look at me. Keep scrubbing, she ordered softly. In 30 seconds, Guard Miller. She subtly inclined her head toward the guard near the exit. We'll get your coffee. He always turns his back to the room. When he does, you'll dry your hands. She pushed the bucket closer to me. In the gray mop water, I saw a small package wrapped in plastic wrap and black duct tape. Take this. Go to the dry trash can near the pantry. Lift the bag, put the package at the bottom of the barrel, put the bag back, go back to your pots. I stopped scrubbing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the brush. I can't, I whispered. Rook, if they catch me. She finally looked at me, and the coldness in her eyes froze the sweat on the back of my neck. He can. And you or you can explain to Red why you're no longer under my protection. The ultimatum was absolute. You have 10 seconds, Elara. Don't mess it up. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest I could feel it in my neck, in my throat. I saw Guard Miller turn, his shoulder relaxing as he picked up his mug. It was now or never. The world slowed down. The clang of pots and pans faded. All I could hear was my own breathing and Rook's voice. 10 seconds, I plunged my aching hands into the dirty water of the bucket, my fingers closing around the small, dense package. It was heavy for its size. I walked the 6 meters to the trash can, each step feeling like a kilometer on unstable ground. The smell of rotting potato peels hit me. I lifted the edge of the black plastic bag, the rustling sound ringing loudly in my ears. My hand trembled. I dropped it. The small thud it made on the bottom of the metal was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I put the bag back, smoothed it out. The guard turned, mug in hand, and his eyes passed over me without seeing me. I went back to the well. My legs felt like cotton. I had done it. I had become a smuggling mule. When Rook passed me to leave the kitchen, she didn't say anything. She just grabbed an apple from a box, a strictly forbidden act, and took a bite, staring at me. The mini turning point. I had paid the first chapter of my debt, but the real price was the erosion of who I was. I was no longer just an innocent woman unjustly accused. I was now officially a criminal. I was becoming part of the place I so feared, and the only person who seemed to notice was the oldest woman in that prayer group, who watched me from the service line with deep sadness, as if she could see the stain that had just formed on my soul. The woman from the service line, the one who had watched me in the kitchen, became a constant, silent presence in my new, hellish routine. Her name was Maria. She wasn't tall, like Red, or physically imposing like Rook. She was small, probably in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and hands gnarled by arthritis, but which moved with surprising grace as she peeled potatoes or served portions of food. She had the kind of face that life had severely punished, but her eyes were the anomaly. They weren't dead like Red's, nor cold and calculating like Rook's. They were deep, calm, and most disturbing of all, she didn't just look, she witnessed. She saw me in the courtyard, keeping my distance. She saw me in the cafeteria, eating quickly with my head down. And she saw me that day in the kitchen, at the exact moment my soul broke, and I became Rook's accomplice. Her gaze contained neither judgment nor pity. It contained recognition. And that was, in some way, much worse. A few days after the incident in the kitchen, I was back in the pit, my hands now covered in open blisters that stung at the touch of the hot water and caustic soap. The pain was a welcome distraction from my shame. I was becoming an expert at focusing on the physical pain to avoid the moral nausea that rose in my throat every time Rook passed me with an almost imperceptible nod. During a lull in the noise, when the guards changed shifts, Maria approached me. She moved silently. I didn't even hear her come until she was beside me, pretending to inspect the floor drain. "Cold water," she said, her voice low and with a slight accent I couldn't identify. "When you're done, before drying, let the coldest water you can find run over them." I stopped scrubbing, surprised she was talking to me. "What?" She looked at my red, raw hands. "For the burns, the cold water draws the fire out. You need to draw the fire out before it cooks the skin underneath." She spoke with the simplicity of someone sharing a recipe, but her words landed on me with double weight. She pulled a small plastic container from inside her apron pocket, something that clearly shouldn't have been there, and slid it to the edge of my sink. "Vaseline," she murmured, "mixed with something that helps. Use it tonight after the lights go out. Put it on your hands and cover them with your socks." Before I could thank her, before I could even process the act of kindness, the first genuine act of kindness I had witnessed in that place, she turned. But then she stopped and looked directly at me, her dark, calm eyes holding mine. "You're not like them," it is, my heart skipped a beat. "Rook thinks you're a tool. Red thinks you're a prize. They're both wrong." That was the mini twist. "But you're so afraid of being the prey that you're forgetting to be human." She paused. "They think the book you hid is about power or money. But I know what Evelyn Reed read. She knew me. She knew Evelyn." The shock must have been visible on my face. "Evelyn didn't deal in mundane secrets," Maria whispered. "She dealt in miracles." She walked away, leaving me in the well, the hot water rising, my hands throbbing, and the small jar of Vaseline feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. I wasn't a terrorist. I wasn't a thief. I was, apparently, the guardian of something far more dangerous, proof of a miracle. The small jar of Vaseline became my talisman. I kept it hidden under my thin pillow, a physical reminder that kindness, however rare, still existed in that place of concrete and despair. Maria's homemade ointment did what the prison infirmary didn't bother to do. In 3 days, the open blisters on my hands stopped burning and the skin began to heal, forming a new protective layer, pink and sensitive. But while my hands healed, my mind was more inflamed than ever. Her words echoed in my ears, louder than the screams in the hallway, louder than the clang from the cell doors. Evelyn didn't deal in worldly secrets, she dealt in miracles. Miracles. The word seemed absurd, a childish fantasy in a place that fed on the absence of hope. Yet she said it with such certainty, with such profound calm, that I couldn't dismiss it. I needed to know more. I needed to find her again. But Maria was like water. She was everywhere and nowhere, moving through the cracks of prison life, never still, always watching. Rook still possessed me in the kitchen, and his calculating eyes missed little. Red still hunted me with her gaze in the yard, her disdain a promise of postponed violence. But my obsession with them was fading, replaced by a new and urgent need to understand what Maria knew. The opportunity came unexpectedly. I was assigned to the Central Corridor cleaning crew, a job no one wanted because it meant being visible to everyone, but it gave me access to areas outside Block B. The Central Corridor connected the cell blocks, the mess hall, and the administrative offices. It also led to the chapel. On Thursday, as I scrubbed the same worn patch of linoleum, I saw Mary's small prayer group pass by, their heads bowed, moving toward the multi-purpose room that served as the chapel. My heart raced. This was my chance. I glanced at the guard at the end of the corridor. He was engrossed in a newspaper, bored. I left my bucket and mop leaning against the wall and slipped into the chapel, the door closing behind me with a soft sigh. The contrast with the rest of the prison was immediate and shocking. It wasn't the noise, but the silence. A thick, almost dusty silence that seemed to absorb sound. The air smelled of cheap candle wax and old varnish from wooden benches. The light streamed from tall, barred windows, but it seemed softer here, less accusatory. Maria was at the small pulpit, not preaching, but reading softly to the 4 women seated in the front row. I stood at the back, an intruder in my dirty blue uniform, feeling the weight of irony crushing me. I, the Bible girl, the terrorist accused of religious fanaticism, was standing in God's house for the first time in my life, and I felt only fear. I waited, my muscles tense, ready to flee if the guard appeared. The women prayed, their voices a soft murmur that seemed out of place against the backdrop of distant shouts from the prison. They seemed at peace, a feeling so strange here that it felt offensive. When they finished, the other women left silently, passing by me as if I were invisible. Maria was the last. She gathered her papers, closed the worn Bible in the chapel, and descended from the pulpit. I moved to intercept her, my throat dry. "Maria," I whispered, the words coming out scratchy. "Please, I need to know. What did you mean about Evelyn? About miracles?" She didn't stop walking, her worn shoes barely making a sound on the floor. Her dark eyes met mine for just a second, and in them I saw a warning. She continued walking toward the door. As she passed me, her shoulder brushed lightly against mine. "Not here," she murmured, so low I almost didn't hear. "Caesar's ears are everywhere, even in the house of God." I turned away, frustration overwhelming me, but then the slightest twist. His hand, dry and rough, brushed against mine. "Patience, it is," she said, and I felt something being pressed into the palm of my hand. A small square of paper, folded tightly. "Read it when you are safe. Destroy it afterward." She left the chapel, leaving me alone in the silence, my heart pounding against my ribs, and the first piece of truth, the first paper, burning a hole in my sweaty hand. The small square of paper in my hand felt as heavy as one of the concrete slabs in the hallway. The walk back from the chapel to Block B was the longest journey of my life. Every click, the sound of my worn shoes on the linoleum, felt like a confession. The guard at the end of the corridor didn't even lift his eyes from the newspaper, but I felt as if a spotlight was fixed on me. The smell of my own cleaning bucket, ammonia and dirty water, became my disguise, the only reason I had the right to be in that corridor. The note was warm and damp in my closed palm. I slipped it into the elastic waistband of my uniform pants, a violation of rules so grave that if found, it would send me to SEG, isolation, for weeks. That small piece of paper made me a real smuggler, not out of a debt to Rook, but out of my own desperate need to know. The fear was different now. It wasn't the sickening fear of being beaten by Red. It was an electric, high-octane fear, the fear of carrying a secret that was alive. I could feel Rook's eyes on me as soon as I walked through the ward door, but I kept my head down, my face a mask of exhaustion from cleaning, and went straight to our cell. Safe. Maria's word echoed. Where was the safety? In the cell, Rook watched me with his calculating eyes. In the yard, Red's eyes hunted me. In the hallways, the guards patrolled. The only safe place in all of Iowa State Prison wasn't a place. It was a time, and that time was between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. After the 10 p.m. lockup, I waited. I waited for the corridor lights to dim to the night glow. I waited for the sounds of the cell block to quiet down, the muffled cries to give way to coughs and sleepy murmurs. And most importantly, I waited for the sound of Rook's breathing beneath me to deepen, becoming a steady, heavy rhythm. Only then, when the silence of the cell was a living creature breathing around me, did I turn to the wall. I pulled the thin blanket over my head, creating a small tent of darkness. My heart pounded so hard I feared Rook could hear it. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the note. In the almost non-existent light leaking through the gaps in the blanket, I read Maria's handwriting, small, precise, and urgent. It wasn't a letter. It was a riddle. 4 short lines. They didn't kill her for the book. They killed her for what the book can do. Evelyn didn't heal bodies. She healed time. The book is the map. The key is the garden. I read it again. And again. The words danced before me, making no sense and, at the same time, making a terrible and profound sense. Did it heal the passage of time? Was it the delusion of an elderly woman locked away for too long? The key is the garden. I thought of Genesis, of the Garden of Eden. But that seemed too obvious. Evelyn. I closed my eyes, forcing my librarian mind to return to her apartment, to the conversations we had over tea, to the book she handed me, her Bible. It was old, with a leather cover, but what I vividly remember was that it was full of notes in the margins. And the garden. It wasn't Genesis. It was a page near the end, in Revelation. It wasn't about the beginning of the world, but about the end, or its renewal. There was a small illustration of a tree, and next to it, Evelyn hadn't written words. She had written numbers a sequence. A coordinate? A date? I couldn't remember. Destroy it afterward. Maria's instruction was absolute. I couldn't burn it. I couldn't flush it down the toilet. There was only one way. Under my blanket tent, in the darkness, I brought the paper to my lips. I put the note in my mouth. The paper was rough, the graphite bitter. I chewed it, swallowing the secret, feeling it scrape my throat. The mini-turn was visceral. Maria's secret was no longer on the paper. It was in me, and the truth hit me. The police had the book. It was locked in an evidence room, but they didn't have the key. They didn't know about the garden. I was the only one. And Maria, with her enigmatic note, wasn't just giving me an answer. She was asking me, what are you going to do with it? The secret didn't dissolve. I felt it lodged inside me, a cold stone deliberately placed amidst the heated panic that had been my daily existence. The prison remained unchanged. Clang from the doors at 4:30 a.m., everything was still the same. The smell of rancid oatmeal in the cafeteria and the greasy, steamy wall in the kitchen were still the same. But I was different. The world suddenly became a sharp, painful focus. I saw the cracks in the concrete, the way the sickly hallway light caught the dust, the nervous twitch on Guard Miller's face, and I saw Rook and Red with a frightening clarity. They were no longer the shapeless monsters of my fear. They were tactical problems. Red, with her predictable rage, was an animal I needed to avoid. Rook, with her cold intelligence, was a chess master I needed to outwit. My fear for my physical safety, though still present, was being eclipsed by a new, overwhelming terror. The fear that Evelyn's secret would die with me. Evelyn healed time. The phrase was absurd, a Zen koan, and yet it seemed like the only truth in a world of lies. I became an actress. I scrubbed the pots with the same desperation as before, kept my eyes downcast in the courtyard, feigned the same trembling when Red passed by. I became the Bible girl. That's what everyone expected me to be. Broken, scared, and empty. But Rook was too clever. She sensed the change before I even realized it. The way I avoided her eyes was different. It wasn't the fear of prey anymore. It was the evasion of a liar. One night, in the cell, long after lockdown, when the darkness was so thick it felt like a wet blanket, she spoke from the bottom bunk. Her voice wasn't a sleepy murmur. It was a sharp blade in the stillness. "You're walking differently, 774B. I froze. My heart leaped and then began to pound slowly and strongly. "You smell different. You smell of secrecy." I said nothing, barely breathing, praying she'd think I was asleep. I heard the creak of her bunk. "Don't pretend you're asleep. You haven't really slept since you got here." She was right. What did that crazy old woman from the chapel tell you? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Rook saw everything. She knew about my meeting with Maria. She told me to pray. I lied, the strange word in my mouth. She said, "God forgives." I heard a sneer of derision from below. "God doesn't live here, Alara. I do. And you still owe me. Whatever Maria is selling, hope or any other rubbish, it won't save you from Red." "I will." I turned in the narrow bed, the cold metal against my hip. The darkness of the cell seemed alive, filled with its invisible, questioning eyes. "I have nothing, Rook," I whispered, and for the first time, my voice sounded firm, even to my own ears. I used the logic she taught me. "I'm a circus attraction here. Red wants me. You protect me. The guards look at me like I'm about to explode. I don't know what Evelyn was doing. I don't know what Maria wants. I only know that I'm trapped here forever for a book I haven't even read." The lie was so good, so close to the truth, that it almost convinced me. I heard Rook remain silent for a long time, and I thought I had convinced her. But then she said, "Okay, if you have nothing, then you won't mind doing one more job for me tomorrow." And that was the mini-turn. I had lied to her. I had deceived the chess master, but the result wasn't freedom. It was a test. I had just proven to her that I was capable of lying, capable of keeping secrets. I had become more valuable to her. And I realized the terrible truth. To protect Maria's secret, I would have to delve even deeper into Rook's world. Worse still, the note said that the book was the map that was locked in the police evidence room. But the key was the garden, and to find the garden, to understand the clue, I desperately needed access to a Bible. The Bible girl, the religious terrorist, now had to find a way, in a maximum security prison, to get her hands on the only book that could save her soul or condemn her forever. Rook's job wasn't another dirty favor in the kitchen. It was a promotion. 3 days after our conversation in the darkness, my name was called for a new job assignment, library assistant. The irony was so thick it almost choked me. Me, the librarian, returning to my natural habitat. But this time, the shelves were mouse-gray metal. The books were stamped, "Property of the State Prison," and the covers of many were torn or stained. The smell wasn't of dusty old paper and tea. It was of mold, cheap glue, and the same industrial disinfectant that permeated the rest of the complex. The library was a long, narrow room with the same tall, barred windows as the rest of the prison. It was quiet, but not the peace of the chapel. It was a tense, guarded silence. It was overseen by a civilian employee, Mrs. Gable, an exhausted woman who looked like she'd given up everything a decade ago and cared less about the books and more about the clock striking 5. My official role was to check the entry and exit of books, put them back on the shelves, and manage legal research requests. Rook found me in the periodicals section, hidden behind a shelf of old magazines. She moved like a shadow, suddenly appearing beside me while I pretended to organize issues of National Geographic from 1990. "You learn fast," she murmured, without looking at me, her fingers flipping through a magazine. "Welcome to the Nerve Center, Elara." She explained the real job. It wasn't about pots and pans or packages. It was about information. Mrs. Gable doesn't mind, as long as nobody bleeds on her carpet. That makes this the perfect place. She told me the library was the main exchange point for kites, the secret messages that kept the prison running. It was how she communicated with other blocks, how she knew what was arriving in the delivery trucks, how she knew which guards were corruptible. "Your job is simple," she continued. "Classic section. The Count of Monte Cristo, 3rd shelf, 5th book from the left." She finally looked at me, her eyes cold and serious. "Twice a day, when you arrive and before you leave. You check page 100. If there's a note there, you take it. You hide it in the waistband of your pants, under the elastic. You hand it to me in the cell. If there's a note I need to send, I'll give it to you in the breakfast line. You put it on page 100. Don't read anything. Don't be late. And above all, don't get caught." I froze. This was infinitely more dangerous than the package in the kitchen. This wasn't a one-off favor, it was an ongoing role. I was the central node in her information network. If I were caught, it wouldn't be a week in solitary confinement. It would be a conspiracy charge. I would be complicit in everything Rook was running: drugs, extortion, violence. "Rook, I can't," I began, my voice a terrified whisper. She turned to me, her face impassive. "You can, and you will. Remember, Red still wants you, and Red thinks you're stupid. I think you're smart. I think you're a librarian who knows how to be quiet and invisible. Prove me right." She walked away before I could protest further, blending in with the other inmates browsing for books. I stood there, the smell of musty paper filling my lungs, my heart pounding frantically. I was a reluctant intelligence operative. But then, as the panic subsided, it was replaced by a surge of electric adrenaline. The mini turning point. I was terrified, yes. But Rook was right. I was a librarian. I knew how to be invisible. And I was in a library, a place full of books, including the religion section. In my desperation to protect myself from Rook, I had forgotten my own mission. Her job gave me the perfect cover. I didn't need it anymore. Find a Bible. I now had access to dozens of them. I had to play Rook's game, yes. But while I was passing his dirty tickets in Monte Cristo, would be searching for the garden in the apocalypse. The game had become more dangerous, but for the first time since I was condemned, I had a chance. The library had become my sanctuary and my trap. The smell of old paper and binding glue, once the scent of my comfort and my profession, was now mingled with the metallic smell of my own fear. Mrs. Gable, the civilian librarian, barely lifted her eyes from her computer, her pale face illuminated by a bluish light, her work reduced to filling out spreadsheets. Her apathy was my cover. The silence of the room was no longer tranquil. It was a tense vacuum, filled only by the sound of her rhythmic typing. Thush! The sound of a book being slid back onto the shelf, and the pounding of my own heart, which seemed loud enough to echo off the plaster walls. Every morning, I entered the library feeling eyes on my back. I was no longer the frightened newcomer. I was Rook's errand girl. This gave me a dangerous status. The other inmates gave me space, but their looks were a mixture of fear and contempt. I was a tool, and everyone knew who I belonged to. My first task of the day was always the same: walking to the classics section, my heart pounding wildly in my throat, pretending to arrange the books while my hand went to The Count of Monte Cristo. My first real job was terrifying. The kite Rook gave me in the breakfast line was tiny, a folded piece of tissue paper as small as my thumbnail, and it was hidden in the seam of my sock. I approached the bookshelf, my hands sweaty. I picked up the book. It weighed as much as a brick. I opened it to page 100. There it was, another identical kite waiting for me. The exchange, take one, leave one. My fingers trembled. I fumbled, almost dropping the note Rook gave me. I could hear Mrs. Gable typing. I could hear another inmate breathing 3 rows away. I made the switch, closed the book, and put it back. Rook's note was safe in my hand, and the note I'd taken was in my pocket. I'd done it. Now, the second part. My own work. My whole body was vibrating with adrenaline. I went to the religion section. It was small, dusty, neglected. There were maybe 20 Bibles, all with the same state-supplied navy blue hardcover. My heart sank a little. They looked sterile, uniform. Even so, I picked up the first one. My hands, now nimble with panic, flipped through it to the end. Apocalypse. I searched for the illustration of the Tree of Life, the page I vaguely remembered Evelyn showing me. I found it. The page was clean. The margins were empty. I tried another, and another. Nothing. They were just books, copies and more copies of printed words, lifeless, without notes, without numbers. The hope that Maria's note had ignited began to fade, replaced by a cold despair. Of course, how stupid of me. The map wasn't there in any of the Bible. It was in that, the Bible, Evelyn's Bible, the same one the prosecutor held up in court as proof of my fanaticism, the same one that was, at that very moment, locked in an evidence bag in some police station basement. The secret was with me, the key was with me, but the map was lost forever. I was risking my life in prison for Rook, in exchange for a clue that led to a dead end. I rested my head against the cold metal shelf, the smell of mold and despair filling my lungs. I was defeated. I closed my eyes for a second. The key is the garden. It was a cruel joke. When I opened my eyes, my vision was blurred with frustration. I reached out to put the last sterile Bible back in its place, but my hand bumped into a different book, one that was tucked horizontally on top of the others, almost hidden. The title on the spine was faded. The Great Awakening, A History of American Mysticism. I pulled it out, annoyed at my own mess. The book was old, the pages yellowed, and when I opened it, something fell to the floor. It wasn't a kite. It was a laminated prayer card, worn at the edges. The front had a faded image of a serene garden. The mini flipped over. I picked it up. The other side wasn't blank. There was small, precise handwriting in pencil. It wasn't Maria's handwriting. It was Evelyn's. And below a verse from Genesis, there was a sequence of numbers and a single word. Orion. I recognized that handwriting. And I recognized that word. Evelyn wasn't just reading about religion. She was mapping the stars. The small laminated prayer card felt like a live ember in my hand. The musty paper smell of the library vanished, replaced by the faint scent of roses and chamomile tea from Evelyn's apartment. Orion. The word opened a locked door in my memory. Months ago, on a clear winter night, Evelyn had pointed to the sky from my apartment balcony. "Look, Alara," she said, her voice full of an almost childlike wonder. "There's the hunter, Orion. People look to him for guidance, but they forget that he's also a pursuer. It all depends on which side of the story you're on." Evelyn wasn't just a kind old woman. She was an obsessive amateur astronomer. She had star maps pasted on the inside walls of her closets. Maria's time healing wasn't a spiritual metaphor. It was something literal, something to do with the stars. I looked at the numbers on the card, 11/16, 03, 14. It wasn't a coordinate. It was a date and a time. November 16th, 3:14 in the morning. A date that was only a few weeks away. The garden wasn't a place on Earth. Perhaps it was a celestial event. And Evelyn's book, the map, was in the evidence room. I quickly tucked the prayer card into my sock, my new personal safe, and put the Book of Mysticism back on the shelf. Mrs. Gable hadn't noticed anything. I was just the imprisoned librarian, organizing the dust. My world, already dangerous, had become a multi-layered minefield. I now served a mistress, Rook, while trying to deceive her into following the clues of another, Maria, to uncover the secret of a dead woman, Evelyn. The exchange of kites in the Count of Monte Cristo, it had become my most terrifying routine. The act of sliding one ticket out and another in, all under the casual gaze of other inmates, made my heart race to the point of nausea. Rook sensed the change. She wasn't a brute like Red. She was an observer. She stopped me in the breakfast line, the noise of the cafeteria providing a blanket of white noise. "You're tense, 774B," she murmured, picking up her tray of gray porridge. "More tense than usual. I thought you'd like the job in the library. It's quiet." I muttered something about Mrs. Gable being particular about organization. Rook gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, organization." She paused, and the weight of her gaze was physical. "Did you find what you were looking for in the religion section? You spent a lot of time there yesterday." My blood froze. She knew. She didn't know. What? But she knew I was looking for something. I had become predictable. I thought about reading, to pass the time," I lied. "Well," she said, starting to walk away, "whatever you're reading, read it quickly. Red's patience is running out, and mine too." I needed to talk to Maria. Rook's threat was real, but Evelyn's mystery was more urgent. I found her in the laundry room, a hell of hot steam, noisy washing machines, and the strong smell of bleach. The noise was deafening, making it the only safe place for a conversation that couldn't be overheard. I grabbed her arm as she pulled a heavy sheet from a cart. "Maria, the card, I found it." She turned to me, her eyes wide, not with recognition, but with pure terror. She ripped her arm from my grip. "Are you crazy?" she hissed, her voice barely audible above the noise. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Orion, the numbers, the garden," I insisted, desperate. She pushed me back against a damp wall. "You're stupid, it is. Do you think I put that card there for you?" The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. "What?" The mini turn. Maria's eyes were full of fear, but not bime. "It was fear of I didn't put that card there," she said, her voice trembling. "Evelyn didn't just have a librarian friend. She had disciples, students, and one of them is in here. One who isn't Red, isn't Rook, and isn't me." She moved closer, the smell of soap clinging to her clothes. "And she thinks that she's the traitor? She thinks you turned Evelyn into the police to keep the book. You're not being hunted by Red for what he has. You are being hunted by this other person, by what they think you are." He did. The deafening roar of the laundry room's washing machines was replaced by the oppressive silence of the main hallway. Maria's words, female disciples, hunter, traitor, they ricocheted off my mind, each one a stray bullet. The prison, which I was beginning to understand as a binary chessboard between Rook and Red, suddenly became three-dimensional, with a new player whose rules I didn't know and whose identity was a ghost. I stepped out of the cloud of steam and bleach and into the cold, stagnant air of Block C, and everything seemed different. The world had tilted on its axis. The woman sweeping the corridor, whom I had never noticed before, now had eyes that seemed to pierce my back. The inmate, reading silently on a bench in the courtyard, visible through the barred window, no longer seemed at peace. She seemed to be waiting. Maria was afraid, a primal fear I hadn't seen even in the weakest newcomers. This new threat wasn't about prison power, like Rook, or about extortion, like Red. It was about revenge. It was about faith. And there's nothing more dangerous than a crusader who believes you've betrayed their god. The smell of cooked cabbage coming from the cafeteria made me nauseous. I was no longer the Bible girl, a nickname born of curiosity. I was the traitor of Evelyn, a death sentence pronounced by an unseen jury. I had to go back to the library. I had to exchange it, Monte Cristo for Rook, an act that now seemed like a childish distraction. The library, my only refuge, the place where I found Orion's card, now seemed the most obvious trap. Mrs. Gable was at her desk, the click, click, click. The only sound was from his keyboard, a metronome for my growing anxiety. I went to the classics, Rook's ticket secure in my hand. But this time, I was terribly aware that the other, the player, the huntress, might have been watching me. She was a disciple of Evelyn. She knew Evelyn's system. The prayer card in the mysticism book wasn't an accident. It was a dead postbox. And I, the stranger, the traitor, had just stolen the mail from a secret network. I made the exchange in Dumas's book, my hands now slippery with cold sweat, no longer trembling. The fear had become so intense it was almost a sedative, making my movements stiff and deliberate. I grabbed the note that was waiting for me, addressed to Rook, and slipped it into my waistband. My work for the visible predator was done. Now, the terror of the invisible predator. I forced myself to go to my workstation, a metal cart full of returned books and catalog cards that needed filing. Mrs. Gable liked the cards stamped alphabetically. It was monotonous, meaningless work, and I clung to it, trying to anchor myself in the routine. Stamp, file, stamp, file, the smell of ink and cardboard. But I couldn't concentrate. My eyes darted to each inmate who entered the library. Was it the tall woman in the law section, the quiet woman reading poetry? My hands were sorting through the completed requisition forms, the razor's edge, stranger in a strange land, and then a card made me stop. My breath caught in my throat. It was a standard requisition card, but the title requested was The Great Awakening, A History of American Mysticism, Thimi, the book, the mailbox book. The handwriting was elegant, precise, the same handwriting as Evelyn's on Orion's card? No. It was very similar, but not identical. It was an imitation, a message. Someone was telling me they knew. My heart pounded against my ribs. The mini twist. I turned the card over. The back, where the librarian's notes should have been, wasn't blank. There was a single pencil drawing done with a steady artistic hand. 7 stars, 3 on a belt, 4 marking the shoulders and feet. It was small, elegant, and utterly terrifying. It was the hunter, Orion. She wasn't silent anymore. She wasn't asking me, she was telling me, I know you got it, and I'm coming. The symbol of Orion on the requisition card was a silent scream. The huntress was here, now, in this room. She was watching me as I processed her threat. The library, my only intellectual refuge, had become the most dangerous arena in the prison. Every breath sounded like a betrayal. Was it the woman in the law section? The one leafing through a novel by the window? Mrs. Gable finally looked up from her computer, her usual apathy broken by my deathly pallor. She seemed about to say something, but the library door slammed open with a loud, deliberate creak. It wasn't a guard. It was Red. She shouldn't be there. She didn't have library privileges. Her presence was such a blatant violation that even Mrs. Gable stood up. "Inmate, you can't," she began, but her voice trailed off. Red wasn't looking at her. Her eyes, filled with a bored rage, were fixed on me. "Enough games, Bible girl," she said, her voice low and lethal. "Rook may think you're a smart pet, but to me, you're just a safe. I'm tired of trying to break into. Time to use force." She started walking toward me. I recoiled, bumping into the book cart. The sound of the metal rattling was the starting gun. "Mrs. Gable, press the button," I yelled. But Red was faster. She grabbed the front of my uniform and threw me against the history shelf. My head hit the metal with a dull thud, and the world exploded into white dots. Books fell around us like dead birds. "Where is it?" she growled, the smell of cigarettes and anger on her face. "The money, the secret, whatever Rook is using you to hide." She shook me hard, and the world wouldn't stop spinning. I saw a blur in the doorway. Rook. She was there, watching, blocking the only way out. She wasn't protecting me. She was attending, she was using me as bait. She wanted to see what I would do when broken. Mrs. Gable screamed on the phone, her voice high-pitched and terrified. Red hit me, a punch to the stomach that took my breath away, and I fell to my knees, gasping. "You're nothing," she spat, preparing to kick me. But what fell from the waistband of my pants wasn't a note from Rook. It was the laminated prayer card, Orion's card. It slid across the polished linoleum floor, spinning slowly, and stopped a few feet away. Red stopped, frowning at the small object. Rook stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on it. Time froze. Mrs. Gable stopped screaming. And then, the mini-twist. A foot moved. A foot in a worn prison sneaker belonging to the quiet woman who had been reading poetry at the corner table the whole time. The woman I'd barely noticed. She calmly, deliberately, slid her foot over the prayer card, covering it. She looked up. Her eyes weren't vengeful. They were terrifyingly calm and protective. She was the huntress. She was the disciple. The prison alarm finally blared, a deafening scream that filled the silence. Red looked at the door, confused by the new dynamic. Rook looked at the woman, her face a mask of cold calculation. And I looked at the huntress, who now had Evelyn's secret safe under her feet. The guards were coming, but the real fight had just begun. It was no longer about my survival. It was a war for that card. And I realized the ultimate truth. I wasn't the guardian of Evelyn's secret. I was merely the bait that had brought it to light. The alarm was deafening. Heavy boots screeching down the hallway. Chaos. But in my head, for the first time since Evelyn handed me that book, there was silence. A cold, crisp silence. I saw Rook at the door, her face a mask of frustrated calculations. Her bait had been stolen by another player. I saw Red being restrained by the guards, her face red with a fury she didn't understand. And I saw the huntress, the woman of poetry, who looked at me over her shoulder as she was handcuffed, her eyes not saying, "I got you," but "I protected you." And I understood. Sometimes prison doesn't break you. It just burns the lies you told yourself. It forces you to see who you really are when there's nothing left to hide behind. They called me a terrorist. They called me a murderer. They gave me a number, but they didn't know who I was. They didn't know the real story was only just beginning. That moment in the library, it wasn't an end. It was a baptism of fire. My story isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about the distance between the two. It's about the weight of a promise and the price of truth. If you've ever felt trapped in a life that wasn't yours, if you've ever been silenced by a secret or defined by someone else's lie, then you understand my cell. You know that the worst bars, the coldest ones, aren't made of steel. They're made of fear, silence, and loneliness. This journey is mine, but the struggle belongs to all of us who have ever been judged by a truth that no one else could see. I don't know what healing time means. I don't know what the Orion numbers will reveal. I only know that I can no longer be the frightened Bible girl waiting to be saved. This is my truth. And if this part of my journey resonated with you, if you felt the cold of that cell or the weight of that promise, I need your voice alongside mine. If you are new to this space, if this is the first time you hear me, please sign up, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is a reminder that I haven't been forgotten, that the world out there still cares. If my story touched you, if you felt my fear or my small spark of hope, leave a comment. It's a silent but powerful sign that you're here with me now. I read what you write. I need to know how my story is being received, what you feel. Please comment below. Do you think the huntress is a friend or a new enemy? What would you do in my place? Knowing what you think makes me feel less alone within these four walls. And finally, if you believe that the truth matters, please share this story. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest place, the fight for justice is worthwhile. Silence is the worst sentence, and I will no longer remain silent. My fight continues, and I need to know that I am not alone.